let me just introduce myself. Hi, my name is Abhishek. I'm a diploma student here at the AA, and I'm joined by Janet Spear from Toronto. She's the corporate secretary and former treasurer of Neil Wyzek Cooperative Housing. Janet, do you want to say hi, or can we hear you?
Hi. Yes, I'm also on the board of directors, and so my role's the corporate secretary and the treasurer is part of my role on the board of directors.
Yeah, I met Janet in when I was living at Neil Wyzek between 2014 and 2019, and today I'll be presenting to you both the tale of the presentation is called "The Tale of Rochdale." The ephemeral counterculture experiment continues. That's all right. So we'll go through the presentation, and then it'll be a story about Rochdale College in Toronto, which was inspired by Rochdale, the cooperative experiment in the UK. And Rochdale, being this sort of quick narrative of a story that a co-op that started in the 60s became a free university and then lasted for about 7 years till it sort of exploded in a drug-filled bust. And how that inspired Neil Wyzek, which also started in the early 70s but survives today for about almost 50 years. So 1965, the Canadian government recognizes that we have a housing crisis and we need to fix it. And they created a new legislation that allowed the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, which is a federal entity, to provide 90% of the loans needed to start a student housing co-op. Rochdale took advantage of these loans and was opened in 1968 as a student co-op. One of the founders, Howard Edelman, learned that if the yearly property tax of $175,000 could be waived if the building housed a functioning education system. So by the summer of the 68, they incorporated as Canada's first free university and the largest of over 300 such free universities in North America. It was an era of intellectual and social tumult, and people were very excited for new forms of education. They were giving out bachelor's degrees for $25 and master's for $50, so it was a very affordable university. And they were a non-hierarchical mode of learning. They were very anti-institution, and they didn't have any tutors, they didn't have any profs. It was all about learning through discourse, learning through your own pathway, and kind of rethinking the education system. The school very quickly began to really push the boundaries of what a university was and the degrees that were offered. They started with degrees in writing and sculpture and art, and very soon they started giving out degrees in drugs and in lasers and sort of whatever people could imagine. Their sort of vision for a alternative lifestyle maybe wasn't shared by the neighborhood. And within the year, Rochdale had sort of cemented a reputation as a place of hedonism and chaos. In a 1969 essay by Barry Zwicker, he says, "The reality of Rochdale, the graffiti, the open use of drugs, the sounds, smells, conversation styles, and way of life shatters most conventional yardsticks by which colleges are measured. Degrees offered, faculty renown, quality of student clientele, facilities, course descriptions. But it will, if it survives, be measured in part by the attainment of its alumni, a criterion also applied to conventional universities, but otherwise it is the antithesis of their image." It was a crazy time. They ended up, the security of the Rochdale College was run by a biker gang called the Vagabonds from Chicago that were trying to dodge the draft. And they were sort of really, doing some crazy things. But at Rochdale, they were also you didn't need to leave Rochdale. They had medical practitioners in the university. People were giving birth within Rochdale, and it was a fully self-sustaining organism. At its peak, they had their own security, police, courts, laws, and services from food to medicine. And they even had a maternal ward for women to give birth in. They started a nursery which survives today outside of Rochdale. They even, tried to build their own Buckminster Fuller Dome. So they were, doing some cool things over there. By the early 70s, they ran into problems with this non-hierarchical mode of living. How do you organize yourself? And this is a video of a meeting that they had in the 70s where they were trying to figure out how to pay this massive mortgage that they took from CMHC, but how do you hold people accountable? And in the meeting, it's these hilarious conversations with people saying, we need to, get people to pay. And then someone's like, no, we can't have hierarchy. No one's, don't make roles. And it's sort of this incredibly frustrating conversation. And I think that led them to a ton of problems. By 1973, they were sort of overrun with drugs, and their sort of free culture was kind of being overly policed as well. The state did not like what they were doing, and so police would come in and do massive raids. In 1973, over the course of 4 months, the police confiscated 27 kilograms of marijuana, 9 kilograms of hash, opium, MDMA, THC caps, mescaline, and almost 1,000 tabs of acid. I think, I think about my time at Neil Wyzek, and if a police raid happened and saw what drugs that were in the building, it wouldn't be that great either. So they didn't really have support from the community. And I think, by 1975, they had defaulted on their mortgage, and the police had come in and were evicting everyone. This is a really funny image, I think, because it's like everyone's upset, and also they don't really know why. It's, anger and confusion, and there's a baby. I think it's very indicative of sort of the very final moments of Rochdale. They were dragging people out, and when they went into the building, it was filled with graffiti and mess, and nothing, nothing survives of the building today except for the murals on the walls. And that's what we can remember. And so I think, what can we learn from Rochdale? In the early 70s, as it was sort of losing control, about 100 residents moved out and formed a new cooperative housing called Neil Wyzek. Just down the street, about a 20-minute walk south. It opened in 1970s to house about 800 residents. And it exists today, so it's lasted for 50 years, and they've, through a very specific organization model, through community involvement, and today I'm gonna speak with Janet about Neil Wyzek and how it's run for so long. Just really quickly, overview of Neil Wyzek, though. It's in the heart of Toronto, this beautiful campus. My experience of Neil Wyzek is, a very fun experience. The rent was so cheap, and we were really excited to move in. This is me in 2014 when I got my apartment. But it also is a space of community. We had games, barbecues, parties, and a lot of great time. So maybe we can get Janet up and talk about how Neil Wyzek made it.
That's quite a big topic there. So actually, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with Neil Wyzek is a bit different than a lot of other student co-ops, because it's not actually a dedicated student building. And in fact, it has never been in its 54 years. Initially, when the building opened, the students, the writers who helped to found it, didn't think that it would be realistic to expect students to know how to run or manage a building of this size. And so they looked for other people in the community who had that background and experience. So these would have been, not, people who are already finished with school. And in the design of our building, we have a variety of units. So we have what we call multi-units, which is basically 4 to 5 dorm rooms with a shared common kitchen and living space and bathrooms. And then we have 2-bedroom units, which are essentially just 2 bedrooms with a shared kitchen and bathroom. And then 1-bedroom units, which it's a full self-contained apartment. And then a small number of bachelor apartments. So even the design of the building was conducive to having people from a variety of demographics and backgrounds, and not necessarily just undergraduate students. And so that history and that the way that started continues on today. And so our building does have quite a range in demographics with, I would say the largest percentage of people are students and they're living in the multi-units. But then also we do have, people who stay on after they graduated, recent grads, and then even people who've been there longer term. I've been there for 27 years now, and I'm not a student anymore. I would say most of the people who live in the 1-bedrooms are not students. And the reason for that is because it takes so long to get one. So this is also, things have changed as the housing situation in Toronto has changed. The rents have gone up a lot. I would say probably mostly in the last 10 years. And so before, people would come and they would go, and, they might stay here for a little bit in a 1-bedroom and then move out. But now, as rents have gone up so much, it makes it so much more desirable to stay even after graduation. So when I first came here, I think the wait for a 1-bedroom was about 6 months. Now it's somewhere between 5 to 6 years. And but you do have to be living in the building in order to get a 1-bedroom unit. But and in terms of the community in the building and the participation in the building, I would say that with dedicated roles, a significant number of those are done by non-students who probably have more time on their hands to be able to do that. But it doesn't mean that it's all like, it's one big happy family. I would say there is a certain conflict between this, the demographics in terms of the student versus non-student, not on the surface. When you meet people in the building and you're interacting with people in the building, everybody's nice and friendly and people get along. It's more of an ideological conflict between the idea of, should Neil Wysick be just for students? Or, does this model where we have people in a range of experiences in their life, does this work for us? And I think the problem often happens is because people move into the building and they don't know what it is. And so they assume that it's going to be like a regular student residence, and then they find it's actually something quite different. Yeah. So I think this is, but the other thing that contributes to this too is the laws in Ontario, where you can't just evict people for, any reason. So it's really mostly non-payment of rent or really serious infractions like, violence or breaking laws and that kind of thing. So the way the building has started has sort of been the way that it's continued on for over 50 years.
That is quite interesting as well, because I think in our conversation, it is so, because in Toronto you are not allowed to evict someone that's lived in a place for a year. Once a student, you need to be a student to move into Neil Wysick, but once you're in Neil Wysick, you can stay as long as you want. And so that does create quite a diverse group of people there. And I think it really helps with knowledge transfer of how to run this building that's been running for so long, because you kind of have a lot of energy with new people coming in and going, I want to be a part of this, I want to contribute, but also the knowledge from the old people that have lived there for a long time, but also have a vested interest in continuing the building's life. But I do think that conflict is interesting. I remember when I first moved in, I was like, why is it not all students? But then, after living there for 5 years, I started to really become friends with all of the people that have lived there for decades and kind of understood the value that each person brings to this co-op. Janet, I have another question for you as well, because when I first moved in, we had a rule about that everyone had to volunteer, and I think it's with a co-op to run, you need the initiative of participants, but initiative isn't always intrinsic. And at the beginning, for when I moved in, the rule was each person needs to do 2 volunteer hours per month to support the co-op. And as an irresponsible 18-year-old, I wouldn't do those hours, and I'd get penalty hours, and then it was this sort of process. But you were mentioning to me that the role of sort of this participation has changed, and maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, so the it was called MCP hours, Member Contribution Program. And I believe that was probably in place from the time that Neil Weissig started. And the idea was that members should have to give back and contribute as part of their role as being a co-op member. The interesting thing, though, and our we have a Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto and Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, and they both talk about how the fact that participation is not actually one of the 7 co-op principles, but people do in co-ops tend to treat it like it is. So I think back decades ago, members probably did a lot more actual work of running the co-op, maybe things like maintenance, repairs and things like that. But then as time has gone by, more of that work is done by actual paid staff, where when you're paying people to do a job, it's, they've got a dedicated role, they're there, Monday to Friday. They're accountable because they're being paid a salary. If they don't do the work, then they can be fired. So since the time that I've lived in Neil Weissig, the role of members in terms of volunteer was mostly, I would say there was two aspects of it. One was social things, so helping set up for events or clean up after events, bringing food to events was a big one. We did for a while have donation drives where people could donate things, and these were donations to other organizations in our neighborhood. And then the other side of it was maintenance, and so these were mostly cleaning tasks. So it could be things like vacuuming the floors or the carpets. It could be mopping stairwells. The problem, though, was that this was done at the members' convenience, not necessarily when the building needed it, specifically for the maintenance type tasks. So oftentimes people would wait until the end of the month, and it's like, oh no, I now need to do my hours, and then everybody would want to go down at the same time, and then maintenance would actually run out of tasks to do, and or you'd end up having people do the same thing, like 3 days in a row. So the system always had its flaws because it was unequal in terms of the amount of effort people put in. There were certain dedicated roles, like if you were on the board or the social committee, or if you were a facility manager, those were dedicated roles, and those were things that were important. But then you would have people who could, bring Rice Krispie squares to an event, which didn't necessarily take quite as much effort. So it was very unequal in that sense. And then for, I think probably about somewhere like maybe close to 10 years ago, they allowed people to start paying for their hours. So instead of having to actually do a work effort, you could just pay, which was set at initially it was set at $10 an hour, so $20 a month, because that was the minimum wage at the time. But during the pandemic, we couldn't do a lot of these things, and we didn't want members doing maintenance work because now there's more issues around liability with people performing tasks where they could get hurt, or and especially during the pandemic, they were ordered in some very intense cleaning, disinfecting products that they didn't want members to use. So with lockdowns and stuff, there was no events happening and members couldn't really do anything. So we suspended the MCP for a while, and then briefly brought it back, and then we suspended it again, and then in discussion with CHFT, it was decided that we really should not have this program anymore. CHFT did not recommend it. They don't like the idea of forced participation. And CHFC had put out a document about thinking about beyond participation, like what do you actually need members to do? Like showing up to general members meetings, knowing about reading the documentation, reading about the proposals and things that need to be voted on at members meetings. So we brought it to a members meeting in August of 2021, and the members voted to eliminate the MCP. So that is a tradition that lasted 50 years and is now gone. And I will say, I believe it's entirely due to the pandemic. If that had not happened, I think things would have continued on as they have been done for a while, and we would have sort of lipped on with this this broken system. But in terms of getting people to participate now, I mean, actually, since we've been doing our members meetings online, we tend to get a pretty good turnout, and those are the things that we need. We still have had plenty of people who volunteer to run for the board, and we've been able to bring back the social committee. So the actual, and we recently we were recruiting facility managers after our facilities opened after the pandemic, and we just brought on, I think, somewhere like 10 to 12 new facility managers. And so all of these people have been doing these things with no extra, external incentive, other than the fact that these are the things that we need. Like if you want facilities, we have a wood shop, and we have a music room and a maker space, and we have a sewing room, all these things that if people like them and they want to be able to use them, then we need members to have to help run them and keep them going. So it's still new. I mean, we're still, it's only been a couple of years since this has been in place, and we'll sort of see, how things go. In terms of events, we already had community assistants who are like part-time employees running events. And so the main difference now is members aren't bringing food to events. So the type of events have changed, but we'll still have to see how this plays out over the next years in terms of people being involved in the co-op.
But I mean, and I think it's looking quite hopeful. I saw that Neo-Waisig has a TikTok now, and they're posting their events on TikTok and all their and their parties and whatnot. So it is interesting to see this shift, and then sort of then charging the participants to do their own things. And we're lucky to have 800 people plus living at Neo-Waisig, so anyone volunteering a little bit goes a long way. I'll sort of ask a really quick final question.
Can we maybe leave the questions at the end, if it's not a problem? So we can maybe finish with the final presentation first, and then we can go back to some discussion, if it's not a problem. I'm mindful of time that we might be running a bit too late.
Absolutely.
Sorry about it.
Then thank you, Janet, for sharing that. And
that would be great. I mean, if Janet can stay, I don't know if she can stay for the final discussion as well. We have one last presentation to go, and then we can go back to the discussion. Thank you so much.